Oh, no, Mike. You did that to me for real? Motley Crue? I guess it's better than smoke that cigarette.
Better than vaping in the boys' room.
That's true. Vaping in the... Well, we'll talk about that. We'll talk. We're going to discuss it. Smoking in the boys... No, not smoking in the boys' room. We're going to help folks not smoke, period. Mike, maybe this is aimed at you. I don't know. David Sweanor joins us, former chair of the Global Forum on Nicotine, straight out of Ottawa, Canada, friends. We're going to talk about the Great American Smokeout, which I believe is next Thursday. Correct, David?
That's my understanding.
Okay, well, I hope so. Because okay, let's talk about this. How are we doing on smoking cessation? People are smarter than they used to be. They're more educated. They understand the perils of smoking and using smokeless tobacco, too. But for our purposes today, we'll talk about smokers. Any data that could offer me some encouragement, and the listeners' encouragement on how much smarter we are, or at least making better decisions?
Well, gee, I don't know whether it'll be encouraging. I mean,
no.
What we know, Daniel, is that the majority of smokers are saying, I want to quit. A large percentage try to quit in any given year.
Mm-hmm.
But an unaided quit attempt, where people just say, I'm just going to quit, cold turkey, about 1 year later, somewhere between 3 and 5% of them have succeeded. So we've got an incredible failure rate, and that's explained because we know that nicotine is delivered by cigarettes as addictive. We know a lot of people who are smoking are in effect self-medicating. They're getting nicotine to treat various conditions. An awful lot of people with various psychiatric conditions are smoking. And we haven't been all that successful. I mean, until lately, where we're starting to see real changes in different markets. And I think we want to look at the good news part of this is, not surprisingly, when smokers are given viable alternatives, a heck of a lot more of them manage to quit.
Well, let's talk about some of those viable alternatives. But if cold turkey is a 3 to 5% success rate, that's not going to work for so very many people. What have you seen in your line of work that are better ideas for people?
Well, if we look at what country has ended up with the lowest rates of smoking of any developed country anywhere in the world, it's Sweden. Sweden now has smoking rates that, well below 10%. Wow. Less than half what they are in the United States. And they've done it largely by offering people a smokeless alternative product called snus. It's a very low-risk product because what kills people with smoking isn't the nicotine, it's the smoke. I mean, smoke just isn't a very healthy thing to get into our lungs. So they've been very successful at reducing all the death and disease caused by tobacco use, not by getting rid of tobacco entirely, but by giving people a form of getting what they want without it killing them, without the smoke. And the country that right now has the most rapidly declining smoking is going to surprise a whole lot of people. It's Japan.
Wow.
A country we've long associated with, high rates of smoking and intransigent smokers. I mean, but what they've done is they've got this new product that isn't available yet in the States, heat not burn products. So it's something that heats something that looks like a cigarette to get a vapor out of it without causing combustion. And again, it's the combustion that causes the problem. And in Japan, we're seeing smoking just plummeting as smokers move to this alternative product. So overall, it looks like this product, by the end of this year, and this is all happening within about 2 years of introduction, by the end of this year, somewhere close to 20% of the cigarette market in Japan will have disappeared. In some parts of Japan, like Sendai, it's around 30% has already disappeared as people move to this alternative, much lower risk product. We're seeing the same with e-cigarettes in places like the U.S., Canada, the U.K. in particular. Very rapid declines in smoking as smokers get what they want from something that doesn't require them to use the cigarettes anymore.
And we know that what they want is the nicotine. People really don't love that mouthful of smoke and the smell of smoke, or do some of them? I mean, have we determined?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be up to two individuals. Yeah. But what we're seeing is that smokers have largely been telling us the truth. They, when asked, they say, "I wish I didn't smoke. I'd like to quit." And when you start giving them viable alternatives, and particularly like we're seeing in the UK, where there's active efforts to give accurate information about relative risk, we see far more people quitting. Far more people are switching. They've just run their big smoking cessation month. They call it Stoptober. And as part of that, the government agencies have been telling people that electronic cigarettes, vaping, is a viable alternative. This is one of the things you can use to quit smoking. And with government agencies, health groups telling smokers about these alternatives, far more people are using them. As opposed to what we often see here in North America with scare stories about these things, trying to convince people that nicotine is the problem or that vaping causes all sorts of health risks. If you start talking about relative risk, that compared to smoking, these things are massively less hazardous, and they're really helpful for people who want to get off cigarettes. It works really well. The same as if we tell people truthful information about smokeless tobacco.
David,
in the United States now, it's less than 10% of smokers believe that any smokeless tobacco product is less hazardous than smoking.
Yeah.
That's what they've been told for a long time.
Wow.
The reality is these products are way more than 90% less hazardous. They're just massively less hazardous because you're not sucking smoke into your lungs.
David,
the more people get to know that sort of stuff, the better the decisions they can make. And we see an awful lot of people moving off cigarettes, once they have accurate information and once they have something to do with it, some product that they can use instead.
David Sweanor's with us. We're talking about the American Cancer Society's Great American Smokeout, which is next Thursday. What about peer pressure? I mean, there's a stigma associated now, and people are kind of looking down their noses at smokers. They congregate, especially. But boy, I'm sure you see it in Ottawa and here in Chicago when it's minus 19 degrees and people are still out there. I mean, that just looks pretty craven and kind of silly. At any rate,
I mean, it's certainly peer pressure can play a role, but only up to a certain point. I mean, it's like we deal with fat shaming, or teasing somebody about being a drug addict. That it's really limited when you've got somebody who is addicted. When you're looking at the people who are out smoking cigarettes at when it's way below zero, they're not there because they really like doing it, right?
Yeah.
And what we usually do in public health when we're doing it properly is that we don't shame people, we empower them. We give them the ability to make better decisions. We let them take better care of themselves. And that's where we get the real successes. It isn't by demonizing people or threatening to throw them in jail or whatever. It's saying, what do you want to do? And we want to make life for you as safe as you want it to be. What can we do to assist you? What sort of information do you need? What sort of products do you need? What sort of nudges can we have? So, in this area, why don't we make sure that the cigarettes cost way more than the far safer alternatives, that the safer alternatives are more readily available, that people get accurate information about it. And it's amazing how you give people accurate information, you give them access to product, and people tend to make pretty good decisions. So I don't think we need the shaming. I don't think we need the let's smite them like they're sinners approach. I think we just need to empower them. Just start telling the truth. Start making alternatives available to them. Meet their needs. Empower them to make decisions about their own health. And suddenly we see smoking rates plummeting. The way we're seeing in Japan, the way we're seeing in the UK with vaping there, the way we've seen in Sweden with smokeless tobacco there. I mean, people make pretty rational decisions, and we've gone through it many times before. The move from patent medicines, the snake oil products, to pharmaceuticals, the move to far safer automobiles, the people buying children's sleepwear that isn't flammable. I mean, we've done so many things that greatly reduce the likelihood of death, injury, or disease. And here we have something that's killing over 400,000 Americans a year. And the attitude of a lot of people is, you've got to quit. You've got to quit not just the smoking, not just the smoking and tobacco, but the smoking, the tobacco, and the nicotine. You have to quit it all. You have to quit it immediately. You have to quit it forever. And that's just not viable for a lot of people. So if we meet them where they are, I think we end up with far more success in saying, we will give you options, we'll give you truthful information, and you can be as safe as you want to be.
I think a key point you hit on there is making these alternatives affordable, because cigarettes, if you're in a city like Chicago where cigarettes are going for as much as $12 a pack, people who are highly addicted, let me give you an example. I can't judge everyone based on who's waiting for a bus stop. Some people do it by choice, but many people do it because they cannot afford a car. I see a ton of people smoking waiting for the bus, and the only deduction I can make from that is people who can afford to get outside of the city where they're so expensive might be able to still find their cigarettes where they're cheaper. In Indiana, they're half or 60% cheaper than they are in Chicago. Is there a law of unintended consequences in effect on the people who end up bearing the burden of expensive cigarettes, as we have tried to raise the price to encourage people to quit?
Well, I think you're bang on, and it's a concern of mine. I've been very involved in cigarette tax policy globally for decades. And in fact, I have a paper that was printed in the New England Journal of Medicine a couple of years ago, co-authored with Frank Shalupka from Chicago and Ken Warner, University of Michigan, arguing that we should differentiate taxes based on differentiated risk. And I think it's simply unfair when we have really good scientific information now about why people smoke. We know about genetics explaining why a lot of people find it really hard to quit. We know about psychiatric conditions that make it almost impossible for some people to quit. And if all we do is jack up the price of cigarettes, knowing these people can't quit, I mean, that is just simply unfair, because you're not only subjecting them to continued huge health risks from their smoking, but the additional problems that you're taking the disposable income that could have given them, say, better housing, better diet, maybe an education fund for their kids. I think that we need to show far more compassion and say that we can put up the price of cigarettes, but we have to make the alternative products broadly available, much cheaper, and give people accurate information so they can move to those products. And that's what we see with things like vaping, that consumers are doing that all on their own. And imagine how much more success we would have if we started getting government agencies, like the way they are in the UK, to start giving accurate information. Let's not just demonize everything.
Yeah.
Let's tell people what the relative risks are. And when you have, estimates that smokeless tobacco is about 96% less hazardous than smoking, vaping possibly in the range of 99% less hazardous than smoking, let's tell people that. Let's make these products far less expensive. Let's encourage smokers to move to them. And we really get a solution, rather than just wanting to punish people. It's how do you empower rather than punish?
David Sweanor is our guest. We're going to wrap it up here talking about the great American Smokeout, always by the American Cancer Society. I'll tell you another thing I've noticed. In my alley, I have what seems to be a hot spot for what I call alley birds. These are overnight drinkers. And when I go clean up, I like to keep my alley clean. I started noticing over the last year, maybe, cigarette packages with the man clutching his chest with emphysema. Here's what I know about that. We don't do that on cigarette packages here. When you pick it up, I start seeing it's either Chinese or Japanese, Vietnamese, I don't know. Clear as day that the illegal, the illicit trade of cigarettes has exploded, at least in my part of the country, and I imagine that means it has nationwide or more. So that's another law of unintended consequences. People get around, they get what they want, so I'm with you totally. Have you seen that more too, more cigarette trafficking?
Well, indeed. In fact, I was testifying in front of a committee of your Senate in Washington on this in July. When we put up prices, there will be various consequences, and we do that trying to get people to change their behavior.
Yeah.
But the problem is people don't necessarily change their behavior in the way you want, like they'll just quit. They change their behavior in a way of, my gosh, this is getting really expensive, what can I do?
Yeah.
We see it in so many areas of policy. If you say we're going to have abstinence-only sex education so that teenagers don't have sex. Well, will they? They'll just change behavior in that they don't use condoms because nobody's told them about it. If you take an abstinence-only view on drugs, people find some other way to get their drugs, illicit supply. And in this case, cigarettes are really cheap to make. You can make cigarettes for about 20 cents a pack. They're manufactured all over the world and moving into illicit channels because there's a whole lot of money to be made in doing that. And you're dealing with consumers who are addicted. They're often very low income. It's a rational response for them to say, I can't quit. What can I do to reduce my costs?
Yeah.
And I think what we should be doing is saying, we will give you a low-risk product in place of that you can use in place of your cigarettes that's not only cheaper than your cigarettes, it's cheaper than the black market cigarettes. So you'll not only save money, you'll save your life.
No, amen
and
to
we
that.
can encourage people to do that sort of thing rather than say, well, just jack up the price and ignore all of that genetic research and all the neuroscience that's telling us there's a lot of people who can't quit. We can help them get off cigarettes even if they can't get off nicotine.
David, let's wrap it up with this. Next Thursday, that's the Great American Smokeout, and maybe it's worldwide. I don't know. What can we do? We've got a loved one, friends, whatever. What's the impetus to get people to stop? Or maybe we're smokers ourselves, some of those listening to this program. What's the goal? Just to take one day off?
No, I think it's it's a process for people to try to do something, but there's a whole range of things that someone can use. There's the pharmaceutical products that are available, but look at things like the vaping products, smokeless tobacco products. Remember, the problem is combustion. The problem is the smoke.
Yeah.
People smoke for the nicotine. They die from the smoke. Try to get whatever you're doing without sucking smoke into your lungs, and you'll be massively healthier.
Okay, good stuff. Maybe a topic for another conversation sometime. I'm not going to lie. I've been around the block a few times. I see a lot of marijuana smokers quickly moving to the vaporizers. Just a straight up or down here. Marijuana smoke, to your knowledge, more toxic to our bodies than cigarette smoke, equitable to it or equal to it or less?
Oh, on a one-for-one basis, one joint to one cigarette, the joint's probably got more toxins. The problem is you'll have a hard time finding anybody who's smoking more than 20 joints a day.
Yeah.
And
yeah, good point.
That's the problem with cigarettes. There's so many of them that are they're being inhaled, and indeed people are moving to vaporizing for marijuana in many markets. We're seeing over half of the marijuana consumption is now through vaporizers, and certainly people who are older, people who are using it for as a form of medicine, they're vaporizing it, and we should be doing the same for tobacco. To say that if you can get it without smoke, way less hazardous to you, not a hazard to the people around you when you get rid of the smoke, it just makes so much more sense, and we can look forward to a time where maybe nobody uses any drug, but in the meantime, let's get rid of the death and diseases caused by it. And in the case of smoking, of anything, it's the smoke.
I think that's something we can all get behind. David Sweanor, good conversation, my friend. I appreciate it. The Great American Smokeout is next Thursday. That's the 16th. He's on the phone live from Ottawa, and when I do my international travel, I tell everyone I'm Canadian. That's just me in the times in which we live. Thank you, David.
Great chatting with you, Daniel.
Thank you. More French and Friends coming up.